A little over a week ago, Gamers Nexus detailed a convincing leak from a trusted source who talked about things connected to upcoming Zen architectures. Part of it talked about how DDR5 is intended to be on premium desktop in 2022. Then there's also a reference to Zen 3 plus APUs that will also support DDR5. Now, some of this lines up with things we have heard before from others and myself, but honestly, I think anyone seeing this could be forgiven for becoming confused, especially considering AMD has booked 5 nanometer not just for 2021 already, but for 2020. And to be clear, I cannot answer every question you may have about all of AMD's upcoming products. In fact, there are so many new SOCs coming out soon from AMD that a new source of mine told me that it's unlikely any one AMD engineer remembers all of them. But I can give details on enough of the upcoming products to paint a greater picture of what AMD's strategy is going to be over the next couple of years. And yeah, that's really what this video will be, a bunch of mini whispers videos, if you will. And the first one will be about updating my Cezanne information. For those who don't remember, I detailed Cezanne a couple months ago when I was sent incredibly detailed information from a cryptic source. The information detailed an incredibly efficient APU that would power down into a 10-watt TDP when undocked and then power up when docked into its keyboard. This is obviously a Surface being tested at Microsoft, and Microsoft was specifically named. And the big bombshell back then was that it seemed to be made on 7 nanometer plus using Zen 3 and RDNA 2. Now that was specific, but the name I guessed myself, and I guessed it based on when different artists died in the past, landing on Cezanne, both because it lined up and because it sounded cool, but also because there were other Cezanne leaks coming out that specifically called out 7 nanometer plus, and that's what my source said. Now this is where things get a little confusing. You see, I updated it later because a separate source told me this wasn't really 7 nanometer plus nor Zen 3, but I actually think that other source was confusing my information with a different SOC, and I think I made the mistake of assuming they all had to be the same as well. And I think that's what's going on right now when you see other people dispute if what I called Cezanne is Cezanne. It might not be Cezanne, but if it isn't Cezanne, it really can only be called Van Gogh unless they're going with a non-artist name. I think Rembrandt's just something bigger about a year or two from now. And honestly, whatever it's called, it really doesn't matter, right? Let's recap here. I detailed a pretty powerful 24 compute unit RDNA 2 Zen 3 APU that's being tested by Microsoft right now. And then Rogue Gamer said that there's a Zen 3 APU coming out with RDNA 2 as well. See, when I see Rogue Gamer report that, I would say he's corroborating whatever I said, and the fact that he says his is called Cezanne probably means mine is as well. You know, the reason he gives that it can't be the same is it has pin compatibility with Renoir, and I think assuming that comes from, well, I guess 2 mindsets. Number one, 24 compute units is a lot more than 8, but you guys got to understand, compute units don't take up that much room, right? And if we look at the Renoir SOC itself, I can see a little bit of room there on the package to make a APU fit that's just a little bit bigger. I mean, something 10, maybe even 20% bigger, just a slightly bigger square. And remember, this is 7 nanometer EUV. There's a decent density increase over Renoir's 7 nanometer. And with that, yeah, guys, compute units themselves, each compute unit only takes up about 5 millimeters squared. So if all they did is upgrade to slightly newer I/O, keep 8 cores and triple compute units, I think it can fit under 200 millimeters squared, and I think it can keep pin compatibility with Renoir. And even if that bigger version of Cezanne that I detailed a couple months ago isn't the one that RoGamer found, it's now time to bring up some information I didn't share with you guys a couple months ago. And to be clear, I didn't share it because I was kind of confused. I didn't know what my source was talking about when he said both a couple times, but now I do because of another source saying that there are dozens of APUs coming from AMD soon. I will then disclose that that original source was talking about a bigger die and a smaller die. So perhaps the one I detailed was the bigger die, and it isn't compatible with Renoir, but there's a smaller version of Cezanne that is. And at the end of the day, I'm not here to argue about code names. I don't think they really matter. You know, that's what this first section, this Cezanne update part of the video is about. Forget the code names for a second. It is clear to me now that AMD has multiple Zen 3, multiple 7nm EUV SOCs coming to laptops probably by the end of this year, and those are meant to fight Tiger Lake H and Intel's other larger mobile products soon. And this brings up a thing that I've said before that I'm going to have to say one more time here, although it probably won't be the last time. It is a happy accident that Renoir is so good compared to Intel's Ice Lake and Tiger Lake U, you know, the 4-core version of Tiger Lake, that it manages to compete with them and even exceed their capabilities in many ways, right? AMD did not intend for Renoir to be this Tiger Lake killer. They intended it to be in budget laptops, but then have a GPU take up small enough amount of die space that it made sense to bundle with dedicated graphics cards. That's why you see Renoir showing up in $500 laptops that blow Intel away, but then also $1,200 gaming laptops with an RTX 2060. That's why. That's what Renoir's made for. Cezanne, or the Cezanne family, or Vango, whatever they call the things I've detailed and RoGamer and others have detailed, these things are coming, and they are the ones doing battle with Tiger Lake. And they could even come out before even Tiger Lake U comes out, so I don't even know how Tiger Lake H is going to compete with that. I guess the last thing to say about these APUs is that I don't think these are the Zen 3 Plus ones that Gamers Nexus is talking about. I'll get to Zen 3 Plus later in the video. Speaking of later launch dates, let's talk about the delayed Intel one that's just barely finally coming out now. Comet Lake. Is AMD just going to ignore this? Well, maybe not. And let's get talking a little bit about Matisse 2. Now, fans will know that I touched on Matisse 2 briefly in a recent video, but that was only on the CPUs that ended up being called the 3100 and the 3300X. I've actually been sitting on quite a bit more Matisse 2 info that I just haven't had time to get out. I assume you guys wanted to know more about CDNA 2 and Ampere first. But now that I've detailed my CDNA 2 information and half of my Ampere information, I think it's time for me to get this Matisse 2 info out of the way. And it's not that exciting, but it is a thing worth noting. You know, the 3300X is just the beginning of a Zen 2 refresh, at least based on what I'm told. And the rest of the refresh should come out around July. Now, these are speed refreshes of Zen 2 meant to make up for the fact that Intel has Comet Lake CPUs coming out. So think things like a 3620 or 3650X or a 3850X. Now, the 3850X I actually think could be dual 4-core CCDs, or in other words, a double 3300X. We've already seen that the 3300X seems to be able to overclock all of its cores to 4.6 gigahertz at the same time, and that's from two things. Number one, the CCD in the 3300X only has one CCX in it, so it doesn't get quite as hot, but also AMD's yields are improving. And I can corroborate this with some people I've talked to who have tested Zen 2 CPUs purchased late 2019 and ones recently purchased within the last month. Expect a Zen 2 refresh that has about 100 megahertz, maybe 200 megahertz higher clock speeds, and yeah, I mean, again, 3620X probably, a 3850X, and maybe a 3920X to take on the i9-10900K. It's not a lot of effort for AMD to do this. Their yields have improved, and they're going to send some of them to gamers now to make Comet Lake look even sillier. And that's all I really have to say about Matisse 2. This is a very short mini Whispers video. This is why it doesn't get its own video, because I just don't think it's worth it. But I guess there is one question you probably have now. It's like, why even bother? Why would AMD refresh Zen 2 in July if Zen 3 is coming out this year? Well, like I said, it requires very little effort from them to get some speed refreshes out to make Comet Lake look extra stupid. And, well, also because AMD probably won't have high volumes of Zen 3 out until October this year, and they're not going to announce Zen 3 in July. That's for Matisse 2. They're probably going to announce Zen 3 like a month before it comes out, and that's because AMD just has absolutely zero incentive to announce their architectures early anymore, right? They're a market leader. They don't need to build a hype train. They know they're in charge, and it's actually in their best interest to tell you as little as possible until right when they go on sale. And to be clear, this new source that tipped me off to all of the new SOCs coming from AMD this year also confirmed that October is a reasonable release date for Zen 3. So for now, I'm going to stick with that being my projection. But what about Zen 4? Well, this individual thinks that I'm a bit too optimistic about Zen 4, and he disagrees with my assessment in that last 5nm video. Well, let me reevaluate for a second. Was I too optimistic or unrealistic? Well, those are actually two different things. Let's start with the optimistic first, and let's find out if I was being too optimistic by comparing my projected Zen 4 release date with the other release timeframes. Now, the 3900X was announced in May of 2019, and then the 3950X was announced in June of the same year, and you could buy the 3900X in early July. As I said in my previous videos, I expect Zen 3 to be announced in September this year and launch in late October, and this new source agrees. So let's just stick with that. Let's stick with Zen 3 supposedly coming out in October for this assessment. All right. Well, that's about as fast as the 15 months Zen 2 came out after Zen Plus. But remember, Zen Plus came out just 13 months after Zen 1, and it was an updated architecture with IPC increases and a slight node shrink, even if it was small. Alright, so I see Zen 3 as not being as big as Zen 2 by any means, but definitely being much bigger than Zen Plus. So I don't know. I mean, I think the launch gap of being somewhere in between Zen Plus's time frame and Zen 2's is therefore reasonable. I do think Zen 3's release date of 15 months after Zen 2 is 100% reasonable. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how ambitious a Zen upgrade has been in a given year, it's always occurred 13 to 15 months after its predecessor. Doesn't matter if it's Zen Plus or Zen 2. So far, Zen 1 to Zen Plus to Zen 2, and as far as we can tell, Zen 2 to Zen 3, it's always an upgrade every 13 to 15 months. And so really, I would say, December of 2021 is 14 months after Zen 2's launch. That's just barely plausible, I would still say, and insist for a paper launch. And in fact, if we're going to think about comparing timescales between Zen releases, we should think of big upheaval architecture timescales. By that I mean Zen 1 to Zen 2 was the mega update, and that took 28 months to go from Zen 1 to Zen 2. So if Zen 4 came out in the end of 2021 in December, well, that would be 29 months after the launch of Zen 2. And so I gotta say, I think my projection is just barely plausible, but it is definitely optimistic. And then we need to address possible. It's plausible based on previous time frames and reasonable to expect that, but it's impossible for it really to come out on time if we don't start getting some information about when it's taping out within a couple of months, and that's according to my source. So be on the lookout for big Zen 4 leaks in the next few months. But if we don't get any information, like if I don't come out with whispers of Zen 4 within 4 months confirming early samples, and especially if we don't hear that Zen 4 is design complete by December of this year, then I say I don't know if Zen 4 is coming out in any form next year. This is me telling you this ahead of time so you don't think I'm making it up in the future, right? I'm optimistic about Zen 4, but I think it's realistic. You know, my optimism, it's just based on their normal release cadence, and it's been impressive every time. I just don't see why it won't be that way with Zen 4. You know, they went from Zen 1 on 14 nanometer with one chiplet on AM4 to Zen 2 on 7 nanometer with 3 chiplets, and one was on a different node. I mean, Zen 4 is going to have 3DX packaging and all these other things, so, well, that's right. I actually do have some architecture details as well. Let me go through those quickly. And if you want to know the full picture, I'm just going to have to insist you watch my last video that touched on some Zen 4 information. In addition to what I have already reported, Zen 4 will, and I'm basically, I think, confirming this for the first time, have 3D advanced packaging, and this is what he said, many new features. It is a big focus on mobile, and in 2022, AMD will be all about next-gen GPUs. That's pretty much it, though. We know there will be more cores, but my source doesn't know how many. AMD is keeping things insanely tight-lipped right now, and that's because they know Intel is trying to figure out Zen 4. They know, based on all available information, which isn't much, but it's out there, that Zen 4 is going to be a major uplift like Zen 2, and Intel is freaking out. So AMD will not let this leak if they can fight it, and they are fighting it super hard right now. Now, the only other things I know is that supposedly there aren't any on-package accelerators, kind of like what I've been talking about on Xbox and PlayStation 5. I was hoping there would be, and it's not some exascale APU level stuff. It is using a new advanced packaging method, but it isn't as advanced as our wildest dreams yet, and that's because AMD wants consistent releases on time to keep their advantage over Intel more than they want to experiment with radical new architectures. So I think it is safe to say that Zen 4 will be a much bigger deal than Zen 3, and maybe a bigger deal than Zen 2, but it doesn't, to me, sound like it's going to be radically bigger, you know, of an upheaval than Zen 2 was, right? Compare it to Zen 2, but don't think of it as a bigger deal to Zen 2, at least for now. That's my understanding, and again, it's worth emphasizing why AMD is the market leader in CPUs right now, and they want to keep that lead, and it's their viewpoint that they should only introduce new upgrades if they're sure they will scale performance, you know, as much as is necessary for the effort put into it, if that makes sense to you, right? It makes sense to have solid, let's say, I don't know, 20 to 50% performance gains every 1.5 years than try for some gamble of like doubling or tripling performance every 2 years. They would rather get the guaranteed 50% every 1.5 years. And it's working out for them, and it's working out for them well. I mean, in fact, I have another source that I really haven't talked about much, that, and this is from a few months ago, that told me that there is this outdated Zen roadmap that's circulated amongst a few people now that shows insane, ambitious architectures for Zen 3 and Zen 4. I believe Adored actually got a hold of one of them, and this is the thing that showed SMT4 in Zen 3. But you know, like I've explained in other videos, AMD nixed that because, well, software hasn't even really, it's just barely caught up with 64 cores, if it even has. And so introducing SMT4 as an example just wasn't worth the effort. Let's just get Zen 3 out with lower power usage and like a 10 to 20% IPC increase, and perhaps we'll up core counts in certain segments. That's what AMD is doing right now. And I guess the only other thing I'll add on to Zen 4 that I feel like is pretty new information is that I think everyone's assuming Zen 3 is all about mobile, right? And then Zen 4 is going to be about server or something, but it really sounds like Zen 3 is just a solid update to everything. Lower latency for gamers, less power usage for mobile, and more performance for server. And then Zen 4 is just doubling down on mobile again. And in the meantime, in between Zen 3 and Zen 4, there should be a Zen 3 Plus. And if we're talking about Zen 3 Plus, it sounds like it may actually be AMD's 5nm pipe cleaner in addition to CDNA 2 that by this source I probably nailed correctly. That's right, it does seem like 5nm CDNA 2 is indeed coming out at the end of next year, like I said it would in the last 5nm video I did. And that these 5nm orders, right, that AMD's placing aren't just for CDNA 2 next year, but for a Zen 3 Plus is what I believe. I don't have 100% confirmation, but if you look at all this information, right, AMD has to be making something on 5nm by the end of this year and then selling it in the first half of next year. I believe that's Zen 3 Plus. I believe Zen 3 Plus is AMD's true 5nm pipe cleaner. I think they're going to get Zen 3 out on 7nm to desktop late this year. They'll get a very real desktop launch of Zen 3 at the end of this year, and then while they're doing that, they will die shrink Zen 3 to 5nm, probably with a couple of tweaks, to then do the true big update to Renoir, and then later that year, a 5nm Zen 3 Plus, or Zen 4 even, update to upgrading Cezanne. And so that gets us back to the beginning. The original thing I brought up, Gamers Nexus leak of DDR5 on desktop in 2022. Think about it. They need to be using 5nm, so I believe they are. With Zen 3 Plus that will support DDR5 next year. And I believe DDR5 will come to desktop with Zen 4 desktop early 2022. But that there could be Zen 4 paper launches for server at the very end of 2021. And so there you go. We have come full circle, and I've given you all the information I have to help explain the other leaks coming out right now, and I'm sure the many more leaks coming out in the next few months. Hopefully it won't be confusing for you anymore. And you know, if there's one note I really want to close on, it's forget the code names and forget assuming AMD has to use specific architectures or nodes. AMD is a kid in a candy store right now, and they're about to apply a Zen art of balancing which architectures to implement at the right time in a final microarchitecture and on which nodes that make sense for the segment they're selling the product in. Either way, whether it's Zen 3, Zen 3 Plus, or Zen 4, 7nm EUV products are coming out this year, and many 5nm products will be coming out in 2021 and especially 2022. And hey, whether they're Zen 4, Zen 3 Plus, or something else, who cares? It's all Zen. And I do hope you enjoyed this video, an amalgamation basically of mini Whispers videos, and I do hope you enjoy this quick goofy ad. I'm Dork Tom. I fumble with my dorky wallet and can't keep my $1 bills straight.
Shut up, nerd!
I'm Cool Tom. I wear sunglasses and have no trouble organizing my $20 bills with my extra wallet. It pops out cards and organizes them, and it has RFID protection and GPS tracking.
Nice!
Go to ekster.com to streamline everyday life with the smartest wallet on the market. Well, I thought it was a funny ad, and links in the description. It is a good wallet. And if you enjoyed this video, like I always say, please consider subscribing and sharing my videos. And I actually do want to touch on the channel for a second here because, you know, March and April were huge months for this channel. I've been growing incredibly quickly in 2020, but I don't think it's just because of a single video. There have been many big videos over the past 2 months that have been gaining me subscribers, and if you're a very new one, consider making sure that you check all of those out. And do make sure you are subscribed because I have more videos coming, like an Ampere Part 2 video. And I know that I shouldn't hype this up before it's out, but the details I have gained access to are pretty insane. And these videos that I'm making sure I get out within a reasonable time frame of receiving the information are delaying a couple other things. Broken Silicons will keep coming out every Wednesday as I always promise, but I may delay the die shrink a week to make sure I have enough sleep to finish these videos. So just look out for that, and loose ends will come once I've gotten these big videos out, so that the Q&A, the live stream Q&A, is done after all of my big stuff is out, so you can ask me questions about all of it at once. And all right, that's all of the updates. Thank you for watching. There's a new Flyover States out too, so that's another podcast that you guys want to check out that I do. And yeah, thanks. Thank you for watching.